Good afternoon, everyone. It is my pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar entitled Legislative Day 2020 Reimagined. My name is Adriana Sanchez-Aldana. I'm the Executive Director of the California Council for Adult Education, CCAE. Today's webinar is a joint effort with the California Adult Education Administrators Association, CAEAA. Can I have the next slide, please? Next slide, please. There we go. Thank you. Before we get started, I have a couple of logistical items to share with you. If you are viewing on your computer, there is a chat area at the bottom of your screen where you will be able to type in questions that you may have during the presentation. All lines are muted, so please use the chat area for questions. Victoria Bate and Steve Curiel will be monitoring the chat box and will bring those questions to Dawn either at the end of her presentation or at the end of the webinar. Many of you have asked if the webinar is being recorded. The answer is yes. And a link will be posted on the CCAE website and emailed to members and participants. And we will be given an opportunity to continue the discussion. Today's agenda includes Reimagined Legislative Day, of course, revised priorities that we have and advocacy talking points, local meeting logistics and how those will work out for you, question and answer opportunity, and a special guest appearance as well as we walk through our advocacy. And we will also be briefly talking about the PAC. Also, I'd like to thank Burlington English and GED Testing Service for their continued support of our organization and our legislative efforts. Thank you. Next slide, please. There we go. Thank you. Today's legislative coaches are Victoria Bate, CCAE State Leg Chair and Director, College and Career and Adult Education at Mount Diablo, Steve Curiel, CAEAA State Leg Chair and Principal of Huntington Beach Adult School, Dawn Koepke, CCAE and CAEAA Legislative and Budget Advocate. And we will also have a presentation by Sharon Bonney, Chief Executive Officer of the Coalition on Adult Basic Education, COABE. I'd also like to recognize David Palmer, CCAE Office Manager, for managing the webinar and logistics for us. Now I'll turn the webinar over to Steve Curiel.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. It is kind of something of a norm now that we're in these Zoom meetings and doing these virtual webinars. That there's some positives to that, but I remind everyone that right around this time we probably would be planning our trips up to Sacramento for our state conference and the Ledge Day activities, and so unfortunately we're not able to do that. But I am excited to see all the great things that are happening out there, talking to my friends out there and what they're doing to reach students in this remote learning. Dawn's going to be sharing about some challenges that we have ahead of us. I think adult ed is in a great position to really make known the value that we provide the state. And I think it's more and more important that we're communicating that, especially in this environment where we're all, even as we speak, we can't see each other. So it's easy to kind of get lost in everything else that's happening. And that's something we can't afford. And as an association, as an organization, as a service to the community, we need to really be mindful of our image and be making known to our legislators, our stakeholders, the work that's being done out there. So again, I welcome you guys. I appreciate you guys' effort and support, and I hope that you're able to engage even more so with these new tools that we've developed and we're implementing with your local legislators, and tell them the great work that you're doing during these challenging times. And with that, I just want to hand it off to Dawn.
Great, thank you. Welcome everyone. Happy to be with you here today. As Steve mentioned, we would have definitely been planning and gearing up for what would have been Legislative Day at the Capitol this week. Keeping that in mind, I would also just want to remind you all that it is as part of those events that were unfortunately kind of altered. It is indeed Adult Education Week, so we're certainly very mindful and certainly very timely to be connecting with you all despite the change of plans. So thought we'd run through, as Steve alluded to, just kind of some kind of changes in our advocacy approach. Clearly, our work still remains critically important, and given the impacts of COVID-19, not only just at a personal, community, kind of national, international public health standpoint, but also the deep impacts it's having relative to our state and national economy, and certainly the economic impacts that it's having on your students as well. So that is certainly front and center as we transition into kind of some revised priorities going forward, and a revised plan of attack in terms of addressing our advocacy efforts and reimagining those in kind of a new way. So let's go ahead and jump in. So with regard to, reimagining, again, this is all brought on based on the statewide shelter-in-place order that was put in place by the governor on March 19th. Just prior to that, we had seen a few municipalities put their own shelter-in-place orders in effect, but ultimately that went statewide on March 19th, probably a date etched in many of our minds. Additionally, as we mentioned, there are going to be massive economic impacts anticipated as part of a few oversight hearings that the legislature has had just in the last 2 weeks through the budget committees. They have been kind of starting to dig into what that may look like in terms of broad impacts. And although the legislature did convene as part of a Senate budget hearing and Assembly budget hearing in the last 2 weeks, they are technically on joint recess until May 4th, when the governor put the shelter-in-place order in effect. Shortly thereafter, the legislature moved to take quick action to authorize spending for addressing the impacts, and then ultimately went into joint recess so as to ensure the safety of their staff and those who may be impacted in the Capitol. We do expect on the Assembly side in particular that at least at this point as of today, they are planning to resume in the Assembly to start taking up policy and budgetary hearings. That said, the Senate has not indicated that they are set on May 4th. There seems to be a bit of a perhaps disconnect between the two houses in approach, but we'll continue to keep you posted as things evolve. But ultimately, even with them going back into the Capitol and resuming their hearings, we do expect public access and in-person access overall to be very significantly impacted, given what will be expected ongoing physical distancing requirements. Nevertheless, there is a lot of work ahead of the legislature and the administration. As you may recall, we're coming up on the May revise, at time at which the governor releases his proposed budget revision that is really intended to be based in updated fiscal revenue numbers coming into the state. That said, obviously that's been impacted given the COVID epidemic, and further the fact that the tax deadline had been pushed out to make it difficult to better assess not only the actual economic impact, but as well to assess what the revenues will be anticipated to come in. So at this stage, we do expect the governor's May revise to be a workload budget, a very condensed, keeping the lights on budget with very tough decisions anticipated, not only perhaps just as part of the May revise, but also expect that the legislature is going to work again to pass that May revise proposal in some form or fashion, but then also is expected to come back in August before the 2-year session adjourns to take up a more comprehensive budget once they get a better handle on the revenue expectations following that delayed tax deadline. All of this said, CCAE and CAEA are confronting those budgetary realities and preparing for the worst case scenario, revisiting our budgetary priorities. So as part of that, just to kind of make sure you all have some grounding in terms of what will be transpiring over the next couple of months. The legislature, again, is currently in joint recess, operating from their districts, doing a lot of constituent work related to COVID has really been their primary focus, is what we're hearing from the members. They are, at least as of right now, expected to reconvene on May 4th. But as I mentioned, there does seem to be some discrepancy between the two houses, so we will have to keep you posted on that. Additionally, we expect the governor to release his May revise at the latest the week of May 11th through the 15th, sometime that week. And following that, the legislature will have to work very quickly, despite the COVID pandemic and physical distancing requirements, in order to pass a budget by June 15th. That June 15th deadline is not movable. It is a constitutional deadline, such that we'll have to move and act very quickly in order to meet that deadline. Otherwise, they will be docked pay that is not recoupable thereafter. So they do have a vested interest in doing that. In terms of their priorities, it will be on COVID-19 impacts and response, homelessness, and wildfire. And in that regard, the legislative leadership has largely suggested to members that they need to pare back in pretty significant ways their policy bills for this year in order to focus on those particular priorities going forward. As I mentioned, they are expected to pass a workload budget, and will definitely be walking back January expansion and new funding proposals, and likely, whether as part of the May revise initially or the August more comprehensive revisit, are expected to make cuts to the budget. As part of that, again, they'll be, from what we understand, reconvening in August before the end of the 19-20 legislative session, adjourns on August 31st to revisit that full budget package. So as part of Reimagining Leg Day 2020, just going through some logistics, we are revising our priorities for the year, given what we've described. Ultimately, this is on protecting K-12 adult education as it's constituted today. Certainly, state advocacy here in the Capitol, as well as outreach from McHugh, Koepke, and Associates to work with legislators, budget staff, budget members, as well as the administration and Department of Finance, is ongoing. However, we do need to ramp up very quickly K-12 adult school, field, and student engagement. We have prepared materials for you, as Steve and Adriana alluded to, including a set of talking points, a draft letter to send by you all to your legislators, your Senate and Assembly member, that also includes attachments that would provide some impact and response related to how you've adjusted your efforts at the local level to address the impacts of COVID-19 while still providing benefit for your students, as well as to describe some of the challenging impacts you're facing. Additionally, that legislator letter should also be accompanied by your adult school fact sheet as updated. And additionally, we provided for a draft resolution for you to perhaps, if you've not already done so as part of Adult Education Week efforts, to work with your school boards to perhaps take that up. That resolution has been updated to include even some additional points relative to how adult schools are faring in the midst of COVID-19. And finally, as part of this effort and immediate engagement, we are also providing some support and direction for remote field advocacy meetings with local legislators. And we'll get into some of those logistics momentarily. So let's discuss our revised priorities and go through some set of talking points. So our newest priority ask, and one that I think everyone on this webinar can get behind, is how important it is to maintain adult education funding, as well as to continue to move forward the governor's COLA proposal that was put forth in the January budget proposal he released. Ultimately, as many of you will recall, although we do, I know, have a growing number of new folks in our adult education realm, but many will recall the fact that during the last recession, adult education demand increased due to being unemployed, looking to retrain and improve skills in order to get back to work very quickly. Unfortunately, increased demand, despite that need, was met with significant decreases in supply as local districts scrambled to backfill their K-12 budgets through categorical flexibility and reducing adult education services and programs across the state. That said, we've done a great deal in terms of building up adult education in the K-12 system. And although we all agree and certainly have been pressing for additional funding, given the stagnant funding levels we've seen over the last number of years, ultimately, it is critical at this stage to maintain the current level of adult education funding at minimum, so as not to further erode adult schools and the services we provide to our students at this time. Additionally, we appreciate the governor's COLA proposal that he provided in his January budget proposal, and are urging the legislature to continue to include it in their final budget allocation. So ultimately, just to be very clear, our ask as part of our new priority focus is to maintain the current funding levels for the California Adult Education Program, as well as to include the proposed fiscal year 2021 COLA in the final budget. Additionally, as part of our original asks that we had put forth, that is an ongoing ask, is to address funding distribution and timing. As many of you well know, there have been some challenges as part of distributing the funding that is already basically put forth in each budget cycle, such that although the allocations to each adult school within each regional consortia has already been defined and decided prior to the July 1st new fiscal cycle, we are seeing many adult schools across the state who are having challenges in terms of when they receive their funding. And it is largely because of some challenges between systems at the Department of Education and the Community College Chancellor's Office on a process-based level. In order to help address that and ensure that that funding gets into our K-12 adult schools' hands as quickly as possible, and to avoid any impacts or delays in service and funding because of challenges with our districts who are also facing their own challenges in funding, particularly given the COVID situation, we do not want to be in a position to have to wait through half of the school year in order to receive that funding. So in order to address that issue and the process challenge and timing, we are asking that in accordance with the funding decisions that are made by consortia in your regional plans prior to July 1st, that the Department of Finance, the Governor's Office, and the legislature establish a line item specifically in the Department of Education's budget to distribute funding directly to adult schools that's been already decided in terms of the allocation amount under the CAEP regional plans. We believe that in doing so, that will help expedite and ensure across the board, across all adult schools in California, that funding is received in a more timely fashion, avoiding some of the process-oriented challenges between the two agencies at the state level. Unfortunately, we did have an increased funding ask. It was a very significant priority for us this year. But given the challenges we find ourselves in COVID, and in order to focus on concerns and ensuring the protection of what is currently provided to adult ed, we are now unfortunately in a position to have to shelve that ask. But we do anticipate revisiting that once we get through this pandemic and the economic impacts associated with it. Additionally, you'll recall we had discussed developing carryover criteria as part of our discussions earlier this year. Also, given the impacts and needing to prioritize the protection of adult ed as constituted and funded now, We are also shelving this particular ask for the present time as well, but look forward to working with the Department of Education under the leadership of Adult Education Director Carolyn Zachary, as well as with the Chancellor's Office and the CAEP Program Office to hopefully address this administratively going forward. And finally, we were also working on education code updates to better ensure that the education code more accurately reflects the current system and delivery within K-12 adult education and adult education program as a whole. Given again the shortened time frame by which to move this forward and the fact that priorities and focus have been shifted to COVID-19, we are unfortunately also in a position to have to put a pause on this, but do anticipate revisiting this as part of the next cycle, particularly as this is largely cleanup and better aligning the education code with how you all currently operate. So more to come in the next legislative session on that. So in terms of moving forward and ensuring positive and productive legislative meetings that we hope that you will move quickly to set up, let's kind of discuss some logistics here. So in terms of these legislative meetings, as you recall from last legislative day activities at the Capitol, really the priorities and the main components remain the same. First and foremost, educating legislators and their staff on who adult schools are in the K-12 system, what adult schools are in that particular member's district, who you are serving, what types of programs you're serving their constituents in, the value of adult education to not only the students we serve, but also their families, communities, and California as a whole. Additionally, to make sure they are educated and up to speed about the regional consortia activities that you have in place, the progress you've made, as well as some of the challenges that are ongoing. Additionally, keeping in mind that these legislators, many of whom are now subject to term limits that would allow them to be in the legislature for up to 12 years. That's quite a time in order to be positive relationships that can help adult education weather this economic impact situation related to COVID and beyond. And also, in terms of that relationship building, tying the work that we do as your statewide organizations on your behalf to the work that you're doing with constituents and as part of the adult schools you work with at the local level in their districts. As part of these new near-term meetings, we're certainly focusing on advocating for our budget priorities specifically, which is protecting and maintaining K-12 adult education funding amid this economic downturn. As well as part of that is in order to preserve the access for the most marginalized constituencies of these legislators for short-term career training, basic skills to support their K-12 learners, and to support our districts in distance learning for those K-12 learners and for that community and school district overall. So in terms of setting up remote legislative advocacy meetings, certainly this is kind of a new realm for many. A lot of associations are moving in this direction, not wanting to miss out on the opportunity to ensure that their priorities and their voice is heard amid the shelter-in-place and physical distancing requirements. So as part of setting these meetings up, we would urge you as part of kind of your local adult school to identify participants that would participate in these legislative advocacy meetings and coordinate logistics among your adult school team. Identify your senator and assembly member, and this is a link that will be in your materials as well as the update that went out to the field. If you're not already familiar with who your senator and assembly person is, you can go to this link here, and those will bring them up as well as contact information for both offices. You really need to have one person as part of your group submit a meeting request via email to the members' offices. Or if you have a specific key contact in that member's office that you've built a relationship with, that is definitely the person that you would want to reach out to submit such a meeting request. As part of your meeting request, you should include the subject of the meeting, which is to discuss K-12 adult education and support for ongoing funding. Additionally, you'll want to indicate the required time under which you're hoping to discuss this. Ideally, these meetings, you'll be able to move quickly to set those up, ideally by May 8th, with the key goal of that, that outreach and these legislators hearing these specific issues and the priority of adult education prior to the governor's May revise being released the week of May 11th. Additionally, you'll want to identify the specific participants that will be a part of this online remote meeting. So that will include your adult school director, principal, perhaps, teachers, classified, students, you know, whoever you all feel is best to participate. We leave that to your discretion, but definitely want to be transparent about who would be participating in such a meeting. Additionally, you need to determine who will provide the call-in number or web meeting access information. So you'll want to make sure to coordinate those logistics with the legislators' offices. Or if your adult school has that access information, you can certainly offer that up. But be sure to be clear about how you will be connecting given the remote and physical distancing requirements. You want to ensure all of the stakeholders that will be participating in the meeting have the connectivity information. And ideally, you'll want to schedule a participant prep call or web-based meeting to organize yourselves ahead of that meeting to help ensure dividing up those talking points, who will be the lead for those meetings, what have you. So in terms, again, of preparing for those legislative meetings, you want to familiarize yourself with the briefing materials that are available to you. You'll want to be clear as to what legislators you will be visiting with via this remote physical distancing approach. What do you know about them? How do you have a relationship already built as part of your adult school work? In terms of the day of coordination, make sure you have a lead for each of these visits that you do on a remote basis, and make sure you know who will be attending the meeting with that lead. Make sure you divide up those talking points and be sure everyone's prepared to participate at some level. Personal experiences, especially from students, as many of you know from participating in person at Leg Day each year, are incredibly valuable and very much appreciated by these legislators. You want to make sure to keep the meeting brief, impactful. Most meetings are about 20 minutes with the opportunity to ensure a little bit of time for Q&A. As far as taking the approach, you want to make sure you're listening carefully, particularly since these are remote-based meetings. Listening carefully to gauge reactions, hear feedback, hear tone from both the legislator and staff is going to be critically important. Important, above all else, do not argue. Always be respectful. And if a point of disagreement arises, politely listen and acknowledge the point of view, indicating you'll take that into consideration and appreciate the comments. You will likely, as part of this, hear from these members and staff about the intense challenges ahead relative to budget. So really, we would just encourage you to continue to message the importance of preserving adult ed so as to provide access and opportunities for short-term career training and to support our K-12 students in the midst of a pandemic, as well as to be a key solution as part of resolving the economic situation going forward. If there are questions that arise that you cannot answer, just be sure to let him or her know that you'll get back to them with the information and that they may also follow up with your lobbyist, myself, Dawn Koepke. And of course, it's always nice to follow up, send a thank you note, and be sure to share your student stories with them. So with that, I believe I'm going to pass it off at this point. And so thank you. I think we'll get back to some Q&A here shortly.
Thank you, Dawn. This is Victoria. Hello, everyone, and welcome. We're very excited that you're here, and we are live streaming on Facebook. This is our first time live streaming on Facebook, and it's going well, and we're getting good participation. We're really looking forward to this first virtual Ledge week next week. Dawn is preparing us, as she always does. We have wonderful materials. I hope you've already seen the materials, but if not, a reminder that everything is on our website, our CCAE website. We will have an opportunity to have questions and answers after a presentation coming up in just a second or two, which is a very exciting opportunity for us. Many of you know Sharon Bonney, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Council on Adult Basic Education, COABE, which is headquartered in New York, which is our sister organization, our CCAE sister organization. And you and our CCAE state membership have amazing benefits through your free membership in COABE, and all just for being a CCAE state member. So to our state members, thank you very much for supporting adult education in California and participating in all our advocacy and legislative work. So I would like to introduce Sharon Bonney, and thank you for joining us today. So welcome, Sharon. She is going to share some exciting news about a new CCAE COABE member benefit. It's a new legislative advocacy tool. Many of you have already used it if you participated in COABE's annual Leg Day, and their this year, first time ever, Leg Day, which was virtual. And she will talk about it as a way to strengthen our CCAE state leg advocacy and to really support our continuing joint COABE federal and state advocacy together. So Sharon, if you would please take it from here and introduce Ignite.
Hi, Victoria. Thank you so much for the introduction. And it's really such a pleasure to be with you all. I'm really excited about this new tool that COABE's been using now for about 2 years, but I believe this is new for CCAE. When you click here, which we're, as you can see right at the top of the ccaestate.org website, and you click right in here at the top, the yellow bar there, you can see that there's all these materials that have been set up for you by your leadership. And what's really neat, when you click on this right here, where you can write both of your California legislators, it takes you to this new tool called Ignite. And this Ignite tool is what we have used, the same sort of tool on the COABE side, to stave off $200 million of funding cuts and add $75 million for the field of adult education. So this is now available here at the state level. And as you can see, my information is here, and I just click Submit. Now you'll need to fill that out when you do this for the first time, but once it's in there, it will remember you every time. So as you can see over here, the recipients, you have your governor and then your legislators. This will pull by according to your zip code. You just want to make sure on that first slide, that first screen, that you put in your zip code. And then this is an editable subject line right here. And then you'll see right here is where you're going to want to put in your adult school information. Okay. So then as you scroll down, this is all editable, so you can add changes or add fact sheets if you'd like. Otherwise, it's going to have this editable closing and your name, and then you click Submit. So once again, just to be really clear, this is on your CCAE website. You go and you click, and it automatically will pull this up based upon your zip code. And then when you're all done, you just click Submit, and it goes in, and you'll receive an email right here. Then you see that this is who it's gone to, and you'll receive an email letting you know that it has gone to these people. So just one more way that we can all work together to raise the visibility of adult education and really let your legislators know that adult education is important. Victoria, any questions?
Thank you, Sharon. No, but we will open it up for questions, actually. So I think we've had a few questions already that have come up in the Q&A section, and which I'd like to present. And we also have some in the actually one in the chat box and maybe some others. So thank you, Sharon. Just a reminder before we start the Q&A that the link for this is on our COVID-19 advocacy resources on the CCAE website. And the link is CCAE Take Action. So that's a really easy link to find and easy to remember, and it will take you directly to where Sharon showed us that all the materials are provided you. So let's begin a Q&A. David, if you would help us with that, we would like to have Dawn and Sharon both available to answer any questions. And I'd like to start with a couple of questions that came up. So the first question, I think, Dawn, you've already answered it, but if you could please speak to it a little bit more. The question from Burr Guthrie is about COLA. And that came up in some private chats that we've heard that COLA is not going to happen. Burr also is asking that he's heard there's talk on the street about flexibility and what's happening, why on the adult ed funding, which you've already addressed. But if there's anything more you'd like to address regarding COLA and flexibility, Dawn?
Right, I think that is a fair concern relative to COLA. As part of the Assembly budget hearing that just took place yesterday, it was a 5-hour hearing during which members of the Budget Subcommittee on State Administration really essentially grilled the Department of Finance and administrators in terms of the approach, the expenditures, and the justifications for what they're doing in terms of the COVID response. But ultimately, one of the questions specifically asked by Assemblyman McCarty, who the name should sound familiar to many of you, although he's based here in Sacramento, he serves as the chair for the Budget Subcommittee on Education. He is a big friend of adult education. He did ask kind of a broad-based question in terms of COLA, to which the Department of Finance, didn't say no, COLA's off, or didn't say that COLA was off the table entirely. They did message that some tough choices are likely to be made and that that may need to be rolled back, but no certainty at this stage. I think, in terms of, our press for that, it was part of the governor's budget proposal. Department of Finance and the legislature has agreed and understood that, adult education, particularly the K-12 side of the equation, has been stagnantly funded. And so I think it's a defensible ask in terms of the work we're doing, the nimbleness in which we can respond to addressing the impact and being part of the solution in getting our constituencies, our students, back into the workforce very quickly. That said, again, I think first and foremost, it is that priority ask, which is to protect K-12 based adult education in particular. And so that's the primary. COLA would certainly be welcome as, if it were able to preserve that, and certainly warranted, but protection of what we have currently is the primary ask. As far as flexibility goes, that is not something that has been explicitly raised as part of any budget conversations I've been privy to. Certainly, we are very concerned about that being something that is put on the table, hence why we are pivoting very quickly to message around the importance of K-12 adult ed and the importance of preserving the funding that is in the CAEP program today. So that's definitely why we're pivoting on the priorities, because we are concerned and want to ensure that we are doing everything we can to stave off any approach on that front.
Thank you, Dawn. I hope that answers your question, Burr. I think that filled in some more information, so thank you. A question also from David Williams. Dawn, you talked about the funding situation being very difficult at this time and requesting funds. So David's asking, if our fall enrollments are expected to be up, the typical adult ed scenario when unemployment goes up, adult ed enrollment goes up. So why not ask for funding if we're expecting for an increase in student enrollments?
It's a great question. I think we are just mindful that there are going to be some very significant, funding challenges for education across the board in all sectors. And so we're trying to be receptive to that. And really, again, going back to, we are more concerned at this stage about having our funding cut than our ability to actually secure additional funding above what we have today. So certainly, I think the talking points, messaging certainly lend itself to exactly that, and what you suggest in terms of adult education being the response to those needs with unemployment skyrocketing. So I think that those are important points to hit home. I think we are trying to be measured in our approach given the sensitivities around the economic situation, but I think that's even more reason why to press that, adult education does not warrant a cut in funding, given that we will be part of the solution in turning the economy around.
Dawn, this is Adriana, and I just wanted to ask you to just talk about one of the things that we've been asking adult education programs throughout the state is how have they been responding to COVID-19 and what things have they done to adjust? And that might be something that we would want to share in our discussions and our legislative appointments.
Absolutely. One of the material items that we have provided as a sample for you all to utilize and to make specific and edit to reflect what you are doing as part of your adult school is a document that outlines some of the great strategies that you're implementing to continue to serve the students that you work with, as well as to highlight a few challenges. I know we've heard from a number of adult schools across the state about the challenges with access to kind of internet connections, much less even having the technology, Chromebooks, laptops, what have you, to be able to access online learning. So certainly those are fair and important, complications and challenges to raise. But this, sample document really is for you to edit and make your own, to show that, just because of, the shelter-in-place order and the challenges that are presented with physical distancing, that you all in adult education are rising to meet the moment, as the governor would say, to address those challenges and ensure that you are still continuing to serve your students. So that is one of the sample documents we put together that ideally would accompany the legislator letter that you would send in.
Thank you, Dawn.
Thank you, Dawn. And this is a good opportunity to mention that, as many of you know, we put out a call for action for that information to share with Dawn what is going on in terms of adapting to COVID-19. And we're asking for agencies, for our adult ed schools, administrators, teachers, but whoever can respond on behalf of your agency to tell us how it's going. What are the challenges? What's going well? How are you adapting? And I would like to make note here that the state, our CAEP, our California Adult Education Programs, TAP, has asked, since we are gathering this information, if they can use the information we collect to help inform CAEP state planning and the supports and training. So this is critical advocacy work, which we need all of you to do, please, for Dawn and for our CAEP and TAP. And this is ongoing. There at the moment is no closeout or deadline on this to keep that information flowing. And there is a form that will be available, which you can use on the CCAE website that will allow you to do that rather easily. So thank you for bringing up that point, Adriana. A couple of more questions I have here. One is from, actually I have two from Kristen Arps. Dawn, Kristen would like to know, for group meetings, are those perhaps better multi-agency meetings for our virtual Ledge week or Ledge meetings next week? Or is it better to have individual?
That's a great question. Ultimately, we defer to you all as to who best to participate in these meetings. We're mindful that the regions often span multiple legislators. And so what is important is that the person that is reaching out to the senator's office or the assembly member's office, that there does need to be at least one or two members or participants that are actual constituents of those legislators. So, keep that in mind. That's one of the prerequisites. If you have a great working relationship and great stories to tell as part of your broader consortium work, and want to invite your colleagues to join you, that is certainly okay to do. Again, really the important talking point here is preserving the adult education funding that is in the California Adult Education Program, and not ensuring that the legislature and administration do not make cuts to that funding. So to the extent that you want to invite some of your colleagues as part of the other adult schools and your community colleges in your consortium, I'll defer to you how best and who best to include in that. And I think, perhaps that could just strengthen that messaging if that's collaborative in that way. But again, to be clear, there does need to be actual constituents a part of those meetings for those legislators.
Thank you, Dawn. And Kristen's other question is about priorities, district or agency priorities. She's wondering if it's a good idea to have an A plan, B, and C plan, or will around core programs and services that absolutely must be maintained, or will the state provide some support for the priorities in terms of defining what the priorities are when the push comes to shove?
Well, at this point, I don't believe we've heard anything about further ratcheting down or altering or further defining priorities. I think when it comes, in terms of adult education, I think really to focus in on, again, the messaging around the important work you're doing with the most marginalized among many communities in the state. The fact that our adult schools provide, short-term career training opportunities to help address the unemployment concerns and to ideally get folks back to work, I think is really important. Many adult schools I know do a lot in terms of kind of training for LVNs, CNAs to help support the governor's call for strengthening the healthcare workforce, and that's really important to be clear that we are definitely a key player in that. As well as importantly to be clear that we are supporting our K-12 students' education as well. I know Joanne Durkee, who's a longtime adult education champion who has served on the board of both CCAE and currently serves on the board of CAEAA, who also is a Contra Costa, Mount Diablo school board member. She has really just, tried to impress upon the leadership in both organizations, as well as do outreach to her fellow board members around the state from various districts, the critical importance of ensuring that not only are we just messaging to legislators about the importance of adult ed, but that our school boards and our superintendents are bought into the value we provide to the districts as a whole, to addressing the needs of their K-12 students and communities as a whole. So we certainly can't forget about that, and doing whatever we can to hopefully secure their support to elevate, the importance of preserving adult education to help support the broader district's mission. And I will just say, I think I did see somewhere in the chat just, about the, verifying and not verifying, but confirming that these adult education dollars are not allowed under current statute to be used by the districts for other purposes. So that's really important to be mindful of. These dollars are specifically and solely for adult education.
And Dawn, this is Steve, can I just add a little bit to that, just so folks, as they go back and when they talk about prioritizing, really you gotta remember that these funds, as Dawn mentioned, they're categorical, they're tied to a local consortium plan that justifies the allocations for each of your members. So really, when you start prioritizing, and I think that's something you should be talking about, that's a consortium level conversation, not necessarily one for your school district by itself, although they should have input and let their representative know what's a priority for them. But that should all go back to the consortium and a discussion about what programs are essential for the consortium and have a broader conversation beyond just the district.
Great point, Steve. Thank you for bringing that forward. This is the time our consortia statewide can support what we are doing regionally, which then supports what we are doing in our local school districts. So Neil Kelly wants to make sure that people remember that a memo went out from the CAEP office last week. So it's this very topic about the repurposing of CAEP funds. So please refer to that and keep in communication with the CAEP office regarding any questions about that or concerns or anything that comes up that you think the state needs to know about. I think we have a few other questions that are showing up in the question and answer section. To Bethany's question, I'd like to ask Sharon, could you respond to Bethany Eli's question? It's about the appointments feature, which I think she's familiar with or seen in Ignite, and we did not cover that specifically today because of lack of time, etc. But could you speak to that for just a minute for those who want to be brave and explore that feature of Ignite?
Oh, sure. So you can use Ignite so many different ways. You saw how I pulled up the link, and I'd be happy to go back in and show that. But when you pull up that link, you can customize the message that's in there, and you can use that to reach out to your legislators that way. In fact, I just have to admit that we just did this for our virtual Capitol Hill Day on April 8th. We had more than 91 visits that were set up this way. People used the software. They went in and customized and asked for a meeting. And included when they wanted to meet with their legislator and received a response back and set their meetings up that way. So you can certainly use the tool that way as well.
Thank you, Sharon. So the tool is available. We just really haven't covered it today. We encourage you to explore using it. And remember, good old-fashioned email and phone call follow-up work as well to schedule meetings. But as we go forward, we will be providing more supports and some training perhaps on using to the benefit and the enhanced features that Ignite provides us. One or two more questions we have time for quickly. There's a question from Kevin I'd like to answer. It's about when we might expect GED testing or the high school equivalency to resume. So for those of you who are the GED examiners or who are also administrators for the high set, there is a survey that just went out by Pearson VUE for the GED testing about the capacity of testing centers to pick up where we left off pre-COVID-19. And it seems from the nature of the survey that there's some interest on their part to figure out a way to do some bulk or massive testing across testing sites that would be prepared to do that, particularly if they have reconfigured their testing centers, workstations for social distancing. So I encourage you to contact Pearson VUE or ETS for the high set regarding that, but you should be receiving, or the administrator, your administrators at your school should be receiving information regarding that process moving forward. There's one other question we have, which is about, from Joe, about districts putting together priorities, reaching out to those members of the Ed Committee or even the Budget Ed Subcommittee. I think that the work we want to encourage is the collective work that Dawn is leading us in. And we would encourage, if school districts have any interest in supporting, that you can connect with your state leadership team, with Steve or with me, and we will connect Dawn. So if we have any districts that are particularly interested in providing support letters or whatever, that we can make sure that we encourage and collect those. Dawn, I don't know if you have anything else you want to add to that.
No, nothing more to add at this point. I mean, we will be, as I think Victoria stated, updating some of the materials as the discussion and things evolve. So we'll continue to keep you apprised in real time about things that are happening. Additionally, based on some of the questions that I saw as well, in addition to using the Ignite software and editing your email or your letter within Ignite to request those meetings, we can also put together a sample template to get out to you as well, and just to help facilitate that as well. But ultimately, using those links as a separate approach to identify those senators, assembly members, calling their offices and finding out who best to send that email to request that meeting is certainly just as workable, and get you a sample for that purpose, or that approach, in addition to the Ignite approach.
Great. Thank you, Dawn. We're quickly getting to 4 o'clock, but we're not quite there yet. Steve or Adriana, if you could check the chat box, I think we have some more comments there. I would like to put, just remind people that Neil has just posted the link to the memo that he referred to, the link to the CAEP memo. Thank you for posting that, Neil, for everyone to have again in the probably hundreds of emails they're getting daily. And Dr. Zachary, welcome, Carolyn. Dr. Zachary is on our webinar as well, Director of Adult Education Office in Sacramento. And she would like to remind everyone that the CDE COVID-19 survey is on the OTAN website, and we're using this information to provide data to the state superintendent, Tony Thurman. So she needs more information and input there. So please make sure that you go to that survey on the OTAN website and complete it if you haven't yet. Don't be fooled. There was a closeout date, but that has been extended and it is still available for input.
Victoria, I think that's the answer to the question that comes below. Where do we send this information to Dawn? When Dawn was talking about how is your agency responding to COVID-19 and what challenges are you having? Again, as you said, Carolyn Zachary posted the information about the survey being on the OTAN website. But in addition, and so that's a very important place to put it. And the information that you mentioned earlier, Victoria, about the information that we would be sending to CDE as well to add to their responses, you can also get to a form that we have on the CCAE website by clicking on that yellow banner at the top of the homepage, and that takes you to the steps, the K-12 Adult Education Matters Advocacy Kit, where Sharon took us through step 1, sending our letter. And I think step 2 is update, send your fact sheet and COVID-19 summary as well. So we'll get that information to CDE as well.
Right. Thank you for reminding everyone of that.
This is Dawn.
Go ahead, Dawn.
Sorry, I just wanted to add on to what Adriana was saying. So in addition to ensuring that CDE through that survey has that type of information on kind of what, kind of how you've adjusted delivery of services and programming and the challenges, we also want to make sure that you're providing that to the legislators and their staff that you will be reaching out to and having these remote visits with. So it's a combination of providing it to CDE as well as the legislators directly as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Dawn. And yes, not to confuse everyone, please remember we're working like you are in real time every day during this COVID-19 period. So there is a little overlap. Dr. Zachary in the survey now knows, I think we haven't yet gotten all around to everyone that wants to know, that we are dovetailing our efforts. That's the CDE, CAEP office, CDE, as well as CCAE. So whether you answer the directly to the CDE information that came out, the CAEP survey that was originally sent out, or to the new survey form or information form that we have just put on the CCAE website, rest assured that information will go to all the right parties, which we are now working more closely than ever in collaboration to collect the information regarding adapting to COVID-19. Dawn, I think we have one maybe last question that seems to be a little bit of a burning question that Neil posed in his comment in the question and answer section. If I can just scroll back up to it. It was about the repurposing of funds. I'm not sure I can find it now. I think.
Yeah, I did see that question. So essentially, the statute currently provides that the funding is solely for adult education and only be able to be utilized on students, you know, as per, you know, the statutory requirements, specifically 18 and over, what have you. So to the extent that there was any ability for districts to take advantage of that funding otherwise for students beyond, again, those adults for adult education purposes, ultimately that would have to be either a statutory change, which certainly we would be all over and on top of, or that Department of Finance and the legislature would just choose to remove some level of the current funding we receive and repurpose that out for other purposes. So it would need to be one of those two approaches. And so again, all exactly why, you know, we're having this conversation, really encouraging you to use the tools we've provided for, again, protecting what is currently in adult education, and that being the primary focus in the short term.
Thank you, Dawn, and that was it. And the reference there is on in the questions and answers. It's Ed Code 84914. So thank you. And I think we can wrap up. It looks to me like we have gone through all the questions, both in the Q&A section as well as in the chat. If we missed anything, there were a couple of questions that came up, but I think they were answered in the conversation and answers to other questions. Please go to the CCAE website and you can email us from there. It will be a form that will direct your questions if we have not answered them, and any additional questions you might be thinking of, to Steve and to me, and we will respond to your questions. If it needs to go to Dawn or whatever, we'll be able to redirect your question to get you the answer you need. And we appreciate everyone's participation. I want to thank Dawn. I want to thank Sharon Bonney. I want to thank David for helping to host and put this together, David Palmer. I want to thank Adriana, our Executive Director, and also Steve Curiel, my partner from CAEAA. And is there anything else for the good of the order that anyone wants to add, Adriana or Steve specifically?
No, I think everyone knows what's ahead of us. We just we encourage you, we ask you to get engaged, get involved, and reach out to your legislators.
And this is Dawn. I would also just love to make one quick pitch for supporting our K-12 Adult Education Matters Political Action Committee. You can go, any amount helps in terms of supporting relationship building in a new way and elevating our profile in a more political way. So please, if you have a chance and even just have $5 to spare, that address and that contribution can be made at k12adulted.org. Thank you.
Thank you, Dawn, for our new PAC. We have a new era ahead of us, both virtual and with our PAC, and a very exciting week next week for our communication with our local legislators. Thank you, everyone. It's been a pleasure, and we will see and talk with you soon.
Yes, thank you for the work you do, everyone. Thank you so much.
Oh.